All right, well, let's get going here tonight. Good discussion amongst everybody here at Refreshment Hour, but we want to get on to our presentation. Our presentation tonight is called The Nature of Science Through Argumentation and Research in the Learning Sciences. Our presenter is Dr. Sharon Schleigh from Purdue University. Dr. Schleigh is someone I've had the privilege of knowing for well more than a decade. Prior to being at Purdue University, she was at Eastern Carolina University as an assistant professor in the College of Education there. At Purdue University, I believe she's in the Department of Physics. At Eastern Carolina University, she was part of the Space Grant Consortium there and did a lot of work working with remote control telescopes and using telescopes to motivate teachers to teach more science. And while she was there, she got very interested in the science of argumentation, which I think you'll find very interesting. It turns out that we want students to do inquiry. They don't naturally do inquiry. They have to be taught how to do it, and part of doing inquiry is being able to defend and communicate your results. And so Sharon will be talking about that a little bit tonight. Prior to going to Eastern Carolina University, she was a PhD student at Arizona State University, studying science education there. To be completely honest, I tried really hard to recruit her to the CAPER team when I was at the University of Arizona, but she decided to stay farther north there at Arizona State University. That's okay. She's now a fellow with the CAPER team, and so we're really excited about that. I first met Sharon when I was working at the University of Hawaii. She was a high school science teacher in those days, and she was working on a number of, she came to a workshop that we were running. And Sharon very quickly distinguished herself as a really top-notch science teacher, really interested not just in how to do good teaching, but also understanding how it is that students think. So it's a real privilege to have Sharon here tonight. Sharon, you've got an hour, actually 58 minutes there for your presentation. Hopefully what you'll do is you'll do your presentation for a half hour, 40, 45 minutes, and then these various student folks in the audience, which includes a lot of graduate students, as well as some faculty from around the country, as well as some CAPER team fellows that are from around the country, will be here to ask your questions and let you defend your answers through good argumentation strategies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Sharon, welcome.
Why, thank you, Tim. I hope I can live up to all that. Okay, so first off, I wanted to say that for some reason, when I'm speaking with my mic on, I can't hear other people talking, but I can see when other people are trying to talk. Some people I can hear and some people I can't. So if you want to ask a question or interject or catch my attention, just click on the hand or do something down below with the chat box, and I'll catch your attention and do what I can to respond. So I actually had a slightly different presentation initially planned, and I changed my plan because I had noted that last time when you folks were watching the talk and you had your class just before the talk, that there was a lot of questions about your research, and so I thought that what might be more helpful was for me to talk a little bit about my research and how I came about it, and a little bit about what science really is. And ultimately, all the research that I've done has been in some way connected to the nature of science or argumentation and how I do research in the learning sciences. Okay, so basically this is what I was hoping to talk about, and I may whiz through some of it and I may go back and forth. Again, if you'd like to ask me any specific questions about anything, please do. I should say that I just recently moved, and so everything, I'm still sort of homeless, so everything I have is in boxes, and so I was quickly going through my emails to see what I had sent to myself that I could pull up and stick into a PowerPoint. So hopefully it's enough to give you information that you find interesting and valuable. So what I wanted to look at was first, what is science? Because that seemed to be sort of the question that was raised the last time that people were talking in this forum. And then I sort of wanted to switch over to my interest as a learning scientist and how I've looked at what science is in my research, and then what my role has been as a learning scientist, and what it is that I see myself doing, where I'm at, and what I'm interested in. So First thing is, this is going to be a fast interactive. I would like you to write in a sentence or two what you think the definition of science is. So I'm going to look to see in this little chat box what you folks write down. Okay, so we can see that there's lots of ideas here. You're right. So Andrea, I noted that you said you have there that your students list subjects, science studies. Another thing to list is technology pieces. A computer is science. A camera is science. Medicine is science. So this is sort of can be a difficult thing, because if we all have these ideas about what science is, then how is it that we're supposed to be sitting here talking about, one, how to teach science, two, how to do science, and then three, how am I supposed to get you to support what it is that I think I'm doing in science if we don't see science as being the same thing? And that's one of the difficult things when we come to talking to teacher education, is about the idea of how do we know what science is, or what the nature of science is. So the question then is, how do you know when you're doing science? So maybe not what is science, but how do you know when you're doing science versus something else? So let's see if we can get some other ideas about that. What do you think? So you wouldn't be able to list in this case things like the computer or the camera. You would have to have an actual action of doing it. You know, whenever Debbie's happy, she's doing science. I have to agree. I like science myself, so Bill Nye is a very happy guy. Following the scientific method, okay. Oh, but there isn't just one method. Always doing science, it's a common answer. Experimenting. Yeah, it is. It's a very hard question. And again, there's a reason why it's a hard question. So, one of the things that we then have asked students, and I'm going to ask you, and some of you may have seen this and some of you may have not, is you might think about, so what does a scientist look like? If we all have these different ideas of what science is, then what is it that a scientist looks like? So just in your minds, think about that for a moment. In classes, I often have students draw this, or I have teachers draw it. Yes, yeah, go ahead and describe some things. Let's see what we get. I see crazy hair, glasses, because you know those guys are smart. By the way, as I get older, I become a better scientist, just so you know. I am a nerd. I'm not very introvert, so hard to say whether I'm a scientist then. Oh, yes, there was a study of kids doing scientists and drawings and things like that. So that's actually what we're going to look at. So what we have found, and this is a study that actually came out of the TIMSS report, and I'll talk about that again in a few minutes, is that the TIMSS, T-I-M-M-S-S report, found that when they asked people across a wide variety of age groups, a wide variety of countries, that there was a common thing, and that was that when people drew scientists, they drew crazy white guys. Oh, yes, Tim's report. That is Tim's report. So, Tim, why don't you tell us all about it then? So, one of the things that they found is that most of the time, most of you have probably thought about not just the crazy white guy, but also the guy with a beaker doing crazy chemical things, maybe a little dangerous. Notice he's always by himself. Sometimes he's got animals he's torturing. You know, he's smart because he's got pens in his pocket, glasses, a book in his hand. So what they found was that, yeah, and they're usually doing chemistry or biology. It's rare that there's any other kind of science that happens. But they found that these images are actually connected to age groups and to perceptions and interests in science. And so the research is an interesting way of looking at what we think science is. So these were some of the notable things. We have the eyeglasses, the lab coat, facial hair, unkempt, test tubes, flasks. And there's actually an instrument called the DAST, or the Draw a Science test. And you can score this as one of those tools that have been tested in various research projects to look at what people's perceptions are and if their perceptions change when they do different things, maybe a different kind of curriculum, a different intervention, that kind of a thing. And so there's a reason why this matters to us. Look at all these small words. I had to do this because I was trying to show you, I wanted to show how science is not any one true perception. And I know that you folks were talking about that prior to me coming in. And you talked about the different kinds of philosophies or the frameworks. And that's really what it is. It's a philosophy of science. So often we talk about this as science being a one model. Yeah, I'm going to come back, Jane, to the idea of the role models and what that important part is. So at any rate, the philosophies of science started out with the idea that there was a positivist sort of point of view, a framework that said if we do everything exactly this way, and we do everything exactly right, we can be perfectly objective and get a single one right answer, and we'll know that's the right answer because we did it very clean and perfect and we followed this particular method. But people started thinking about what that really meant, and they thought, well, you know, the thing is that it's not really about looking for a correct answer. It's really about eliminating answers that are not possible. So rejecting a truth or an idea rather than proving a truth or idea. And that also those rejections could be influenced by our theories, our backgrounds, our knowledge, and our values. These are all sort of some of the different things that you can see, each of these different types of philosophies. And as they go through, you'll see that it starts out being very sort of strict and structured and what we would get quantitative work out of. And it comes down to more of the interpretivism, which is the qualitative approach or the framework that uses qualitative research. And that's much more of how we do often social sciences through interactions and causal relationships. And we look at generalizations that are based on the researcher's observations, the researcher's experiences and understandings, rather than the respondents or the participants' understandings. Now, none of these is particularly correct. they're all very different philosophies, and because of that, they have different ways of going about doing their science. Now, it tends to be that the what we might call the hard sciences or the natural sciences like physics, chemistry, biology, those are generally done more of as a positivist or in that sort of range of framework. And more of the social sciences are done more towards the interpretivism, which is why you would often hear people say things like psychology isn't really science and educational research isn't really science. And so it was interesting when I heard you folks kind of talking about that and asking, well, how am I supposed to hold these things constant? Because what that kind of told me was that your philosophy at the, as you're talking about science is that there is a particular answer that you're going to try to get or a particular one way or one method. And it's important to recognize that there's a lot of different frameworks and a lot of different ways of doing it. So you kind of talked about that again tonight. That was nice. It took away some of the stuff that I was going to have to talk about. So I wanted to show you the TIMSS report. If you go to this link, this is just one of the TIMSS reports. There have been several done from the TIMSS report over a period of time. And the reason why this became important, the reason why educational research became important was because from the TIMSS report, we started to see that the United States was not doing very well competing in math and science. Now, I'm just going to talk about science, but you could talk about math as well in terms of where we stand. The fourth grade U.S. students were third from the top. Well, that's not so bad. So when I say third from the top, what they did was they had sort of a content type scale where they identified what do students know from kindergarten through, I think, first or second year of college, that sort of level. And they looked to see what they knew in content-wise. They also asked them to draw a scientist, and they asked them what they thought about scientists and whether they wanted to become a science or go into science careers when they got older. And they also observed different kinds of classrooms. So this study was used a lot of different kinds of pieces to get an idea of what was happening in the educational systems globally and how different kinds of interactions, perceptions, cultural things might be influencing those interests and even the level of ability or academic achievement. So the fourth graders were third from the top in that first year. The eighth graders were 17th from the top. So between fourth to eighth grade, we dropped quite a bit. At the ninth grade, we became fourth from the bottom. There was, in the first year, 25 countries involved. There were 60 countries by the fourth or fifth year. So being at the bottom means we're really at the bottom. The ninth grade, so the 12th grade, we were the bottom. There wasn't any other country that had participated at that continent level that was lower. Jana, were you trying to talk? Yeah, and a big talk about that was that people were saying, well, it's not really fair because the United States is trying to educate everybody, and then they said, well, it's not really fair. There are some countries are only doing boys and girls, et cetera. And that is true. There are some issues that still have to be cleaned up, but that's the way it is with all research studies, especially they've talked about educational studies. It's hard to take everything and pull it all apart to make it one nice study. So we take pieces and parts and try to see what they kind of mean. All right, so at any rate, what we've been finding is that has been a consistent thing. Now, one of the other things that was found was at the fourth grade level, and this seemed to be something that happened across the board, that the fourth graders tend to draw pictures of either themselves or someone they knew, or somebody that they thought represented someone they knew when they were drawing scientists. And as they got older, that tended to happen less often. And the correlation to that was that as they got older, they also stopped saying that they wanted to be scientists. So the reason why that became important is when I think about what I want to be if I'm a fourth grade teacher, if my perception of being a scientist is a crazy white guy, well, the last thing I want to do when I grow up is to be a crazy white guy. So of course my perception of science is going to change, my idea of my ability of science is going to change, my willingness to pursue science is going to change. And so therefore our perceptions of science were really important. And that was something that came out of the TIMSS report that was really a valuable thing to note. Since then, there's been lots of reports that have looked at the use of the DAST tools. Let's see. So the other things that we found, okay, so the drawings and perceptions, the interests, they were sort of connected. What they did instead of a longitudinal study was they looked at, they did it over several years, but they didn't look at individual students over long periods of time. They looked at groups of students, and that was the way that they managed their longitudinal study. So there's different ways to coordinate a longitudinal study. Did that answer your question? DAST, D-A-S-T, and I think I actually have a link for you later. Okay, so yes, I'm just glossing over the results. If you really like to learn more about the TIMSS report, go and take a look at it. And the reason I'm glossing over it is because it was sort of a precursor to some of the things that I was looking at in terms of science, or in terms of science education. And one of those things was, so what is science and what is the nature of science? When people say, I want to be a scientist, do they really know what that means? Do they know what it means to be a scientist? Not just, is it a crazy white guy, but how do you know when you're doing science? And this was a really important question because in educational realms, we were really looking at what it meant to be doing science. How do we know when our students are doing science? How is it being taught? And how is science practiced in the real world? Well, it turns out that in the real world, science is practiced in lots of different ways, as I previously showed, and yet it's taught in, blank slide, it's taught in a very traditional way. So you can't see this slide for some reason, I don't know why, but it's a slide of the picture of the frameworks to the new science K-12 education and the new national next generation science standards that are now in development. So really what we were doing was we were talking about in that document, it became recognized in the organization of developing this new framework for teaching science that there wasn't enough knowledge going into a classroom on how to teach. Now, last class, Dr. Lombardi talked about explicit versus implicit instruction, and it has been traditionally thought that if we gave students a lab report and we had them follow this process and do these steps, that in doing so they would learn what it meant to be doing science, and therefore they would know what a scientist really was, and they would get to college and they would be able to do science experiments. Well, that hasn't happened, and that's not what's happening. And so then there was some research that said, well, why don't we just teach them how to tell them when they're doing science and tell them what science is. And that didn't quite translate either. And so what we found is that students need to have both a implicit and an explicit instruction. So in the framework, what we looked at was that science had to have both a knowledge piece. You had to know how science was generated, you had to know how science was practiced, and you had to know what the components of science were. And so the framework actually now specifically says these things. Now the great thing about that is the science standards haven't necessarily been quite as explicit about these things, and so hopefully state standards and national standards will come out on this. But some of the things that they looked at was specific strands about what it meant to understand science. So the first strand is understanding scientific explanations. The second strand is generating scientific evidence. The third strand is reflecting on scientific knowledge, and the fourth strand is participating productively in science. Now, a large part of this came from the research that looked at argumentation in science. What is science and how do we engage in science? Even if we have different processes, one of the important pieces is that because we do have some sort of influences in the data, and we do have some sort of influences in our prior experiences and our prior knowledge and our interpretation, we have to be able to justify what we count as evidence, and we have to be able to justify our methods of doing the research that we're doing. And it doesn't matter what science you're doing, that always happens. But in a biology classroom, what you count as evidence is very different than what you would count as evidence in a chemistry classroom, which is really different from what you would count as evidence in a chemistry classroom. And for that reason, that's part of why scientists have such a strange or such a varied level of what they think science really is. Thank you, Tim, for posting that. It is actually a free book. You don't have to go out and buy it. So if you want to click on it and download it, you can. Okay, so the reason why this became important is because people started realizing that our students were coming out of school maybe having some content knowledge, but that content knowledge was not applicable, and they didn't understand what it meant to be doing science, and they didn't understand what it meant to be a scientist. And so we were having trouble getting people to think about that as a career. I should say that's one of the theories about what's going on at any rate. So people are still looking to see if that's possibly why that's happening, but we definitely have less people going into science. So one of the primary goals of the K-12 science education is to develop a scientific literate society so that we can get more people knowing science content and knowing what it means to do science. And often what that means is teaching science, focusing on scientific knowledge and how that knowledge is generated. It's just as important for us to have students practice science and develop their science in doing the scientific knowledge, in developing their own knowledge, and not just mimicking labs and not just learning what the names of a beaker is and that kind of a thing. Students' understanding of science improves if they look at all those strands and all those areas and they do them as an integrated process. Now this is actually coming from the frameworks for science. So these aren't my words, this is their words. Something else that they said was that students don't increase their understanding of the nature of science by engaging in just scientific practices. Teachers must be explicit about how classroom activities and content relate to specific ideas about the nature of science, and students need time to make sense of their nature, sense-making of their nature of science, so they have to reflect back on it. So it can't just be, here's some a lab, answer these questions, turn it in, and now you're done. There has to be something more to what we're doing in our science classrooms. Let's see. Okay. So the question about the elements for the nature of science. So when I asked you what was science, everybody sort of had different ideas. They said it was asking questions, listing ideas, things like that. Generally speaking, if you were to ask a group of educational researchers or if you were to ask a group of scientists, they would have these sort of things in their list. And again, because they have varying types of disciplines and varying ways of getting their evidence, analyzing their evidence, and making sense of their evidence, their weights for each of these is different for each discipline. But for the most part, one of the things we know is that science should be tentative. In other words, what we know isn't static. It changes all the time, and it changes because we get new tools and we get new ways of looking at things, and we have new ideas. Now, I know we say this to students all the time in school, but students still don't get that. In fact, many teachers don't get it. Most people get the empirical evidence. They seem to understand that you have to have some sort of data. And some people get observations, but inferences are a little bit more difficult for people to understand. I've heard people call inferences predictions. I personally think they're very different. Maybe somebody could argue that with me, but I think predictions and inferences are very different. Scientific laws and theories and hypotheses, scientific methods. Teachers don't like it when I say their new book is way outdated. Hey, well, you know, the thing is that what I tell teachers is their book is not supposed to be a Bible. It's a resource. I look at a dictionary, and I don't speak my language by reading the dictionary. I look at the dictionary to look up information to see how that information might make sense to the thing that I'm doing. And that is, to me, what a science book should be about. I always have several science books in my classroom, and I look at several different things in order for me to get an idea of how the concept might be applied differently or might be understood differently, or the research being done differently, or whatever. So thank you, Ken. I think so too. Okay, so scientific methods. Now, this one drives me crazy because every time I talk to people and they say they're going to teach a scientific method, well, I don't know what that means. If you had a different philosophy, a different framework, then your method is going to be different. So when you talk about a scientific method, it's not, I'm going to make an observation, I'm not going to ask a question, sometimes that method is really messy. Sometimes the way you collect the data is very different. Sometimes the way you analyze that data is very different. And so my scientific method has to be acceptable to the people around me that I'm going to justify it with and argue it with. And so that's part of what I have to be able to do, is I have to be able to talk about it and I have to be able to argue it. The other thing is it has to do with my creativity. The way that I think about a way to organize a research, the way that I think about how to measure it, the questions that I ask. People, I think my personal idea is that part of the reason people have this negative perception of scientists or this crazy hair guy is because to be a scientist you have to be super creative, which means you're not going to be thinking like the normal person or the average person. So therefore you don't quite fit into this mold that other people might think of. And that puts you into being a very different kind of person. Now, I personally think everybody's creative, but it takes a risk to be willing to step out and say, I'm going to be creative, and here's a new idea or a new way of doing things. And so when we look at other people's research, that's part of the reason why it might be hard to find that gap that you guys were talking about, because you're looking at what somebody else has already done, and you're trying to think of a new way to do this, or something that's missing, a question that hasn't been asked that you need to know. And it takes a risk to be willing to step out and do something like that. Objectivity and subjectivity, it's both. It is neither objective nor subjective alone. It has to be both. Okay, so these were sort of the elements of the nature of science that have been put into the frameworks. It's the ideas that many people would agree with. I think argumentation is right there in there, and it should be a piece in there or a discourse. And in fact, when we talk about it in here, you'll see that on this, the practices of science, we do have engaging in argument from the evidence. And this is where we are trying to justify our method. And we're trying to justify our creativity, and we're trying to say this is why this particular research is going to be okay, and this is why it's going to work. these are the different kinds of practices that happen when we're doing science. So when you're doing these things, that's how you know you're doing science. But you can't just be one thing alone. It's sort of a combination of those. And again, the weight of it depends on the discipline that you're doing, and it depends on the audience that you're talking to. Are they going to accept the kind of evidence that you have? They're going to accept the questions that you have as being relevant and important. One of the things that Andrea asked previously was, who cares? You're going to ask a question, but why does that question matter? If it's not an important question, then nobody's going to put any money into that. Let's see. I don't know. Like setting up a control and variables. Hold on. I just got stopped by seeing what this is, but my computer locked while I did it. Okay. There are different ways of setting up traditional experiments, but most of the time when you're doing a traditional experiment in astronomy, you're doing it as a model so that you can isolate variables. And again, that's a different method. You might not do that with a different discipline, or you might not do that for a different question. But models are one of the things that we use when we're talking about doing science. And again, look at this. That's the point number 2, developing and using models. So there are lots of ways of using any of the frameworks that you're talking about in those philosophical frameworks of science to do these practices of science. Okay, so I wanted to now, basically what happened was I had gone through all of this research, and I had looked at, as a previous teacher, how can I improve my teaching, and how can I improve what it is that people do in science education. And you know, I've been kind of going back and forth. I'm looking at some different things. I had done some conceptual change work, and Doug Lamarty talked about that last time about pieces and different sort of theoretical knowledge frameworks. And so my dissertation was actually on theoretical knowledge frameworks, and I looked at how people sort of organize different ideas. But I didn't feel like that was really going to get me anywhere in terms of where I was going to go with my personal interest, which was helping science education improve and becoming a better teacher myself. I really wanted people to be more interested in science. And I saw myself as being a scientist, and I found that people didn't see me as being a scientist. They saw me as being a teacher. Even when I was doing astronomy work, I was still just the teacher, and I was kind of surprised by that. So while I was at an unknown university during graduation, and you can guess, but I'm not going to say, the valedictorian at the university said, at the ceremony, in front of all the parents, the whole university, the whole graduation, she came from the College of Education as a science and math major, going to be a teacher, and she said, well, for all of you, you should know, like many of you, I was going to be a scientist, and I took that first biology exam, and I failed it. I got a 40 on it, and that's when I knew I had to be a teacher. And I was sitting in the front row, and I was so taken by the fact that she would say this publicly, and people applauded. And my peers, my colleagues, were sort of not even hearing what she was saying. I was just amazed that this person who was representing our college was saying that she couldn't make it as a scientist, so she became a teacher. What does that say? You know, teachers can't do, so they teach, right? Oh, so I was so upset. I went to all of my colleagues afterwards, and, you know, during the whole ceremony, I wanted to stand up and start screaming, and everybody's kind of holding me back. And so afterwards, I asked everyone, well, you know, what did you think about that? And they said, oh, she didn't mean that. And I said, so what do you think she meant? And nobody could really come up with a valid idea of what they thought she meant. And instead, they all said, well, you know, scientists do have a little bit more, you know, and they sort of justified it. And I was just floored by this. I know science. I'm a teacher and I know science. So how could it be that educators can't know about it, but they're supposed to teach it? How can that be? So at any rate, what I did was, I'll have to look up that one later on, the YouTube. So I decided to talk to some other people about it, and I was talking to a geologist, and I had mentioned this idea, and he had never taught. It was his first year teaching at the university or any other level, and he had a lot of experience as a geologist, pure scientist. And so he was interested in learning how to teach, and I was interested in trying to find groups of people that we could sort of test and see, well, what do they really know? So we took two different classrooms. We took, not classrooms, but two different courses. We took his geology courses, students who were going to go into science fields. These were their second year science course if they were going to go into a science career or science field. And we took teacher educators who were in their second year, or actually their junior year because they would have been going into their second year of science education courses. And we talked about finding a topic that we both teach that we could modify and make sure we were teaching the same way. And he stepped in my class and I stepped in his, and we decided to do climate change. And we talked about whether climate change was, what evidence there was for climate change and how people were evaluating it. And we did it through argumentation. Now we used the ASEA modules, and we did this through lots of different interactions and discussions, and we tried to show them multiple sides of the argument, multiple data, and try to get them to analyze the data. So prior to doing this, we did a pre and post of what did they think science was. So one of the first things we wanted to know was, do they even know what science is? Do people going into science have a better understanding of what it means to do science than people who are going to go into teaching science? Because if the teachers don't know what it means to teach science, how are they going to help us get these people into that career? And like I said, I'm in the midst of moving, so I only have the data sitting here for like one semester or something, but we did this for 4 semesters now. And all of the data is fairly similar, so we're just going to go with it. And if you want the full data later on, please let me know, and I'd be happy to share it with you. We actually have this submitted to a journal, and we're waiting for it to get published. But anyway, so what we found was we had used a double-sided Likert scale to find out who knew what science was, asking them questions about if this is science or if this is science, and they were scored, and if they got a high score, and so we modified it and played with it to make the numbers easy to analyze. And again, if you want specifics, I'll talk to you about this later. But ultimately what we found was we really wanted everybody to be here. Can you guys see my cursor as I move my cursor across the blackboard? Okay, so let me see if I can draw it. Can you see that? No? Okay, so no. So take a look at the left-hand graph, left-hand top graph. Let's try that. So left-hand top graph, they could be scored a 1 out of 5. I see the pencil drawing tool, but oh, there it is. That one. Okay. Did that work? Yeah. Okay, so this tool. There we go. Yeah. Thank you, Tim Slater. So we really wanted them to be at this top level right here, where this was the 5, and if they were down here, this was the 1. And I don't know if this is big enough for you to see, but the geology students are the dark blue line, and are the blue lines, and the green lines are the science education students. And so what we noticed was that for the most part, they had pretty close to the same ideas about what they thought science was. There was a couple of places where the ideas were a little bit different, but not by much really, and so we didn't see that there was a huge difference in the way that they understood what the nature of science was. The only thing was that the students, see the greens are higher more often up here, and that's because those greens were the after. We had the pre and the post, so you could see that afterwards the students who were in the teacher education course seemed to understand more about what the nature of science was than the students who were going into science. You can ask questions about all of this if you want to find out, you know, what might have happened or how that worked or whatever, and I'll try to give it to you. Okay, so then the next one was we wanted to know content. So this was the content, and this was the people going into the science degrees, and this is their pre and their posts. And then this was the people going into the teaching degrees, and this was the pre and the posts. And for the most part, what we found was that the people going into the geology sciences, and this was specific to climate change data, climate change content. For the most part, the teaching degree students actually knew a little bit more than, they knew more than the geology students, but they didn't gain more significantly than the geology students after the section of modules. Now, part of that is possibly because, you know, when you get to a certain point in gains, or when you get to a certain point in knowledge, the amount that you gain is not going to be as great as if you're way down here and how much you're going to gain. And so that might have been some of the reason for that. So ultimately what we found was that the people going into teaching knew just as much, and generally knew just as much as a teacher as the students going into science. So there wasn't anything that held us to the idea that if you teach, you don't know. What was question number 1 on why the inversion pre-post? So in the questions, I don't know what the questions are right off the top, but in the questions what they were was, and that was one of the things that we wanted to analyze, is some of these questions like right here and right here, sorry, this one right here. It was interesting that everybody seemed to have those, and so that might be that those questions weren't well designed or well written. That may be part of it. But basically what we had done is we had for each section about 8 questions that fit into how is scientific knowledge generated, how is scientific knowledge tentative, how is scientific knowledge, how does it use interactions or social objectivity, subjectivity, that kind of thing. So we'd broken it up into the groups that identified the nature of science. And so when it was done, we averaged out some of these. So this stuff didn't play a huge part in it in terms of affecting the overall result of where they were for scoring. And again, I apologize because I don't have all of the stuff sitting here in front of me. It's in boxes in a garage. Okay, so why is this one blank now? Don't know why that one's blank. That's too bad. Because that was a really interesting one. I really wanted that one to show. Tim, is there some way that we can get that slide to show? Nope, that's not it. The one right after it. Nope, that's not it. The one before that. Nope. Nope. Darn it. Okay, you know, maybe I can show my camera on it. Let's see if I can be creative. Okay, let's try this. see if this works. All right. So one of the things that we did was we thought, well, the way that we teach science in schools is that we talk about the way that students learn in school is a little bit different than what really happens in a science classroom. So for example, we talk about, you can turn on her video panel to make it bigger. Oh, that would be okay. Thanks, sorry. Okay, so what we talk about is that in science, often what we do is we do this, the traditional teaching where we say, if you're learning something, you're remembering some rote information. But if you're really learning it, then you are doing it by making connections and understanding things. And so this new idea about doing something like concept maps. And concept maps have become this new way of identifying, do they not just have the content, but they know the connections between the content. And so we had done some research on how do we implement concept maps, and then how do we score them, and how do we know what they really mean. And then we taught the students in both courses how to use concept maps to express their ideas. So in the first content slide that I showed you where I had the bar charts, that was based off of a multiple choice test. This was a content that we had done off of the concept maps. And here on this side are the ones that were done from the, sorry if I'm making you seasick. These were the ones that were done from the education students, and these were the ones that were done from the science students. Now, one of the things that we found that was very interesting is, first off, I was very pleased to find that to start off, the teachers had much better connections in their concept maps. And the way that they had, we determined that was, they had more hierarchical connections between things. Climate science has much more of a, it's not a hierarchical relationship. There is, it's more of a system. And so we were looking for them to develop systems in the concept maps. And so we could count by the number of terms that they used that led to systems. We could count by the number of different sort of representations that they had to identify groupings within their systems and things like that. And we had actually talked to them about how to go about doing that. And we also talked to them about, they made a pre and then they made a post. And we wanted them to identify how they made them different. Now, one of the things we found was that the teachers always had a different pre and post. So they were always looking to do something different and improve on it. They also were very much more complex in the way that they made them. The science students, they did do some various shapes and things like that. But even when they did the shapes, in most cases, they were still hierarchical. They were following lines of thought rather than relationships and systems. And then here is an example of another one that you can see. Often they were very simplified. Let's try to get back, sorry. They are simplified, and they didn't provide a lot of detail. And very often, they did not change their concept map from the pre to the post. In fact, about a little over half of the students in the geology group did not change their post at all. They, or if they did, they added maybe a couple of words. But for the most part, their concept map remained the same style, the same use, and they just added to it rather than completely changing it. Whereas the science students completely changed it. So yes, that was a very important thing, that what we noticed was that students were looking at, the teacher students were looking at ways to apply the information and to understand it, whereas the students that were going into the sciences were looking to repeat the information and provide something neat and sort of organized. They felt it was more organized. Now, one of the other things that we did that I didn't have on here was we also had them write letters, and we asked them to write a letter in an argumentation style. We had gone through this whole course as an argumentation thing. We said, here's some evidence. What do you think? Analyze it. Tell us what's going on. How does that work? So the question was, did the ed students have more experience with concept maps? Actually, no. We thought that they might, and we were a little worried about that. But there was maybe one or two students that had used concept maps before. None of them, if there was one or two, that was it. It was rare, actually pretty rare. We had to go through in both sections, all sections, all courses, teaching them how to make a concept map. And we started by actually going through the process of taking a simple concept and saying, this is how you make it. What happens if you don't know the concepts? How would you know if somebody knows it or not? And then we showed them how we were going to be scoring the concept maps. So they knew in both courses in all sections how we were going to be analyzing this data, and it was counted as a grade. So it wasn't just something that they could sort of do prettily, whatever that word is. Okay, so we asked them to write letters, and in the letters we asked them to provide some sort of argumentation format that explained to somebody in power what they thought about climate change. So for example, they might write to a local senator and say, I think, I don't like this policy that's being passed in our community about climate change. I think this is something that's going to impact us. This is what I know about climate change. This is the evidence that there is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they were supposed to sort of set themselves up an argument. We had gone through what the components of an argument were, and they had gone through the modules where they looked at the science as an argumentation. It wasn't just here's these terms and here's this information, but it was various pieces of it. Interestingly, a really interesting thing, all of the science education teachers all wrote letters that said, I feel, I think, I believe, and they talked about their personal lives and their personal experiences, and they used a little bit of evidence but not a whole lot. They didn't stick to the data that was collected or to graphs that they had seen or anything like that. They talked about their personal experiences and a little bit of the science behind what we had covered in the course. And instead they use a lot of experts. You know, in our class we learned this, in the book we read this, in the video we saw this, but they didn't really talk about the evidence so much. The interesting thing is that the science students all wrote lab reports, all in third person. They wrote it as this is the question, this is what was found, this is the answer, and it was completely like a lab report. Very, yes, very passive, very, I'm reporting to you, not I stand by this. They made no claims, they made no arguments. Instead, they reported what they had learned. Oh, are we? Oh, no. I'm sorry. Got so hung up on this. So at any rate, there was a very big difference in the way that people were using the argumentation and the way that they were talking about it and the way that they were learning about it. And so what we had thought was that maybe the people who are going into different degrees, different areas, different tracks, have different perceptions of what it is that they're doing, which makes sense because science educators think science is different than the scientists. And so we have this gap that always happens about how do we get them to talk to each other and work with each other in a classroom. So One of the things that I do in my class is I try to get my students to look at how to get engaged in the argument, and I try to teach them that. And so what I do is I give them components of an argument, and they have to choose it. Now, I've taken this from Paige Keeley's work, and Paige Keeley does a lot of formative assessments, and I use this in some of the argumentation that I do, and I use this as my qualitative piece to study from. I look at the structure of the arguments, I look at the kinds of evidence they use, and I look at how they decide to choose something based on misconceptions and ideas. Okay, so for some reason my slides don't want to show up. So the next piece was an argumentation in the classroom, and it was the structure that we've done. Now, I worked with Vic Sampson, and Vic Sampson and I have done a bunch of work on argumentation. What is the structure of argumentation? How do we get students to argue in the classroom? The kinds of qualities that we need for them to have, and activities to do this. And in fact, a lot of this work is what has guided the frameworks and the new frameworks for the K-12 science education. I'd like to say that I got recognized for some of this, but Vic Sampson is definitely a much better publisher than I am and much more ahead of it than I am. And partly that's because I'm all over the board. When I do stuff, I get so interested in everything, and Vic's very well focused. So we put this together, and what we decided was we needed to find a way to get other people to start using this in classrooms. And so again, something else, and I don't know why, but this isn't showing up. So we wrote a book, and this is in print right now, so if you're interested. We have a bunch of assessments and activities for a biology classroom starting, and I'm working on math and astronomy and physics next, and these books are this one is in print. It's printed by NSTA, and the others will be coming soon. We have a contract for them, and supposedly Tim is going to be helping me with the astronomy one, right, Tim? Right, Tim? That's good. So let's see. Okay. So one of the other things I was interested in was creativity in science, because what I decided was, and going through some of this research of argumentation, was that part of the problem was that not only did people not know how to argue, but the part of it was that they didn't know how to argue because they didn't know what it meant to be creative. They thought they had to use something that was already existing and argue for that, rather than trying to develop some new ideas out of what was already existing. And that's, I think, part of what I hear when I was listening to some of your ideas for dissertations, when some of you guys were talking about the research that you're doing, is you have to look at what's there and think about how you can make that different. And that's a creative activity that happens in science. And then you have to argue for why that's a good way to do it. And so we looked at creativity, and we did this with astronomical images, and we thought that maybe if we could teach kids how to be creative and teach them how to be comfortable with being creative, we might change their perceptions in science, and we might change their interests in pursuing science. And so we looked at various groups of students. We looked at students who are already going into science fairs. We looked at students who are going into Science Olympiad. And then we looked at students who were at high risk, not that many people in the area, like the African Americans, girls, things like that, and those who were highly represented in science. And we used the Torrance sort of research, which is really old, but HU came out with a report not too long ago, and we sort of used that to devise our own instruments and did interviews to validate the instruments to identify if people were being creative or not. And so some of the things that we did was we gave them images and asked them to write things about what they thought those images meant, giving it a caption or a title or something like that, and we scored it in different ways qualitatively to identify whether they were being creative or not. And we had various components of what made up creativity based on the Torrance and WHO research. So we had taken what other people had done, we sort of built up on it. And what we had found was that that the people who were going into science fair weren't necessarily more creative than any other groups, but they were more interested in science already, and that by doing activities that allowed the students to feel like it was fun and interesting, like making colored pictures from images from telescopes, that the students were very much more interested and very much more, they had a much higher creative skill. We also noticed that the creativity tended to drop off by age group. And so students who had a higher amount of creativity at about the 5th and 6th grade, it started to drop off and became pretty much non-existent by the time they got to high school. And again, if you're interested in this report, I can show you. It's another publication that's happening. This was another one that we did. We looked at argumentation through science activities. Yes, that is a good point for the SLU activity. We looked at when students do project-based learning, do they understand the nature of science better? Project-based learning often means that they have to engage in argumentation because they have to justify their project, they have to explain it to other people, and they have to convince other people that what they've done is meaningful, useful, valid, etc. And so we did it with both teachers and students, building a telescope and using robotic and remote telescopes. And again, you can't see my slide, and so that's no fun. Gosh, this is another good slide. It's too bad. So what we found was that we did questions with the students, and I can send, I'm willing to send anybody these slides if you want them. I'd be more than happy to. So in the slide, what we found was when students, we asked them every day at the beginning of the class, beginning of the workshop, and at the end, it was a three-week-long workshop, and we asked them questions like, so what did you learn, what do you think, etc. And we found that we could categorize their responses into specific areas, into rote, cognitive, and critical thinking type questions. And there was both accomplished and naive, meaning it was either right or wrong as well. And what we found was when we were doing the traditional type learning, that students definitely were not moving to the critical and creative thinking. But when we did the project-based learning, that more students by the end of the week, a much higher percentage, were coming up with ideas that were critical and creative and not naive. And so I wanted to show you those tables because they looked really good, but that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. We also found that their interest in science increased when they were able to talk about science and engage in it in a way that was meaningful. And that was an important thing that we found. So argumentation allowed them to engage in it. So this is the last thing I wanted to share with you, and that is that we started to try to do a Reset to STEM program. A Reset to STEM program is for teachers, a research-engaged science teacher education program to STEM. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to show teachers how they, pre-service teachers, how they could engage in doing research themselves as a science education endeavor. So basically they're doing mini dissertation projects, and they're doing it in partnership with scientists and teachers in the classroom. And the reason I wanted to show this to you is because on this website, if you want to go to it, there are examples of deliverables, examples of questions you might look at that researchers are interested in, examples of assessments, places that you can publish to. And these were some of the people who won awards for it. They got $1,500 for a semester to do the work in it. And these were all undergraduates who had done some really outstanding work. And this is the impact of that program over one semester. And so we're getting funded again by NASA and the Space Grant to continue doing this. They're giving us some extra money to try to get more pre-service teachers involved in this kind of research so that they learn what it means to be doing science, and they can enjoy they can teach their students. I thought I had the URL there. There's the URL on that side. So this is my last slide, and the reason why this is my last is all in all, what it comes down to is I said in the beginning that my role in what I think I do is I'm a scientist, but I'm interested in learning about how to be a better teacher and how to help science education. And so although I love astronomy, I love doing astronomical observations, I also very much find science education a great place to do my research. And I wish more people saw it as being a true science. It is a very difficult way to do it. You can't get little kids to hold still and to fit into your test tubes quite the same way like you can a liquid. And so my role has been to try to find ways to help other people do this. And so I've served as a mentor for teachers all over the place, across the country. I serve as a mentor at an international level, and yeah, kids in test tubes. And it is my idea to try to help people to understand that the way that we do science is by engaging in argumentation and using our creativity to make science enjoyable and interesting and wow. And that's really what my whole thing is. And I'm sorry I sped through that whole thing, but that's my last slide. So any questions?
Sharon, this was absolutely fantastic. It's exactly the kind of thing we're all very interested in, particularly these issues related to, it's not just the facts you know, but it's the framework with which you put them in place, whether we're talking about beliefs or things they've learned or questions or evidence or even issues related to creativity. This is really, really interesting work, and we're going to keep following you, and we hope to learn a lot more about that. I know folks have some questions for you, but since we're out of video time, what I'm going to do is encourage them to email you those questions, and we're more than happy to have you back and talk to us again in the future. This was really great, and I know I speak for everybody when I say thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. I'm sorry that my slides didn't all work, but Tim, you have my slides, so please feel free to send those out to everybody. And I would love to find people who are interested in the same thing I'm doing. As I said, the best way to get writing done is to work in groups where people are doing the same kind of work so you can share in the writing. And I'm always interested in lots of people working with me. It's a personal favorite thing of mine to do. So thanks for letting me come and letting me ramble on so quickly.